Great. Well, welcome everybody. So good to see everyone, maybe again, but also just for the first time, if this is your first evening of the forum this week. I'm just very appreciative to be seeing people every day. It seems to have been different, so really happy to be connecting with so many people in the community. My name is Kelsey Hansen, and I am the outreach coordinator with the Alaska Wildlife Alliance. And we are bringing, for the first time ever, the Kachemak Bay Marine Mammal Forum here to Homer with really a big goal to help spread information about marine mammals to all sorts of services, water taxis, recreators, enthusiasts, even like guides. So this is something that's been requested from folks for many months, years, and we're excited to be sharing information and really celebrating all the different marine mammals that are here in Kachemak Bay. So we're really excited for y'all to be here. And these presentations are recorded. So last night we had a series of presentations that were different than the ones we'll have tonight and tomorrow. And we also had a hands-on family-friendly discovery lab over at the Islands and Oceans Visitor Center earlier this week on Monday. So it's really a full week, and I'll share with you a schedule here in just a moment. But I wanted to give a big thank you to those who are attending, and as well as our partners here, which are the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Kachemak Bay campus here at the Kenai Peninsula College. So we're very appreciative to have been able to partner with these groups. Truly, this event could not have been possible without those partners that we have here today. And as well as Emma Luck, who will also be presenting tonight. She is a contributor to HappyWhale. She really manages that account. And she is working over at the University of Alaska as well. But you'll get to see her. She also helped with our logo. So we're happy to be working with so many folks to make this possible. And we also want to thank the Opportunity and Martha H. Briscoe funds at the Homer Foundation that really also very much helped to make this possible to bring to the community. So big thank you. And I do want to say, if you're here in person tonight, restrooms, if you haven't already visited those, they're going to be down the stairs and on your left as you're heading to the restaurant. And if you're looking for a trash can, it is that trash bag that's in the corner in a kind of a pile. But if you're looking for that, that's where it is. And if you are attending virtually tonight, I'll have some guidelines in just a moment, but for now, keep your mute on and your video off. So the schedule for this week, as I mentioned, we had a discovery lab on Monday, and then we had presentations last night. And tonight we're going to be having some more presentations, and tomorrow. And then we'll be wrapping up with marine mammal trivia at Alice's this Thursday. It'll be a mixture of traditional trivia and a lot of marine mammal trivia. So we're really excited for us to be ending on a high note there, and it'll be a really fun way to celebrate. And it'll be a miniature quiz on what you've learned this week. If you're interested in knowing more about what type of, if you're interested in some presentations that we have this week, this is what we have. That's what we had yesterday on Tuesday. Tonight, we're going to be learning more from NOAA Law Enforcement on some boater operations around mammals, marine mammals, and then we'll be having a presentation talking about how you can help study humpbacks in the area. And Emma will be presenting on that and talking about HappyWhale. And then we'll also be having a larger presentation towards the end on marine mammals that are common and not so common here in Kachemak Bay. And we'll have a series of presenters, 3 different presenters speaking on that. So I'm very excited. And let's see here, that's about it. Tomorrow we have several more kind of emphasizing, it'll be kind of bringing it all together full circle on really a lot of things that people have been asking about on marine mammals. Might have froze up for a second. So if you are viewing virtually, as I mentioned, please keep your mute on and your video off. That'll help with the bandwidth, and do view your screen in full screen mode so you don't lose any photos. And if you have any sort of questions for the speakers tonight, the last 10 minutes of every presentation will be devoted to questions and answers. please throw questions into the chat and we'll get to those the best we can with the time we have. And we'll also try to get you resources to email or contact folks if you have any additional questions and would like to reach them. And that goes for in person as well. And overall, for everyone, we hope you just learned something new and are able to share information that you've learned. So some folks have never heard of the Alaska Wildlife Alliance. I just want to touch on some work that we do. We've been around since the 70s, the late 70s, and we do work primarily, well, just solely in the state of Alaska to make sure that wildlife are being scientifically and ethically managed. And we have 3 pillars of work. We have advocacy, citizen science, and a lot of education outreach like we're doing this week. And last week we were at a wolf trial in Juneau. So that's some advocacy. We're part of the Alaska Beluga Monitoring Partnership, AKBMP. If you're interested in helping to monitor the beluga whales that are along Cook Inlet, feel free to ask us more and we'd be happy to get you involved. And we co-host the Kenai and Kasilof rivers down here with monitoring in addition to the Kenai Peninsula College. So those are our partners for those sites in particular. We have more on all of this if you're interested in chatting with us over at our table. And just to keep on theme with the week, we do have a marine mammal program that's new and budding, but we're getting busy already. We have some research like with the beluga monitoring. We have marine debris with education programs. We're doing we're dissecting albatross bolus and looking for marine debris. So that's been pretty fun for kids and people of all ages to see that. And we're involved in the Pinniped entanglement group, which has international members trying to help lose the loop and do other projects to prevent entanglements of seals and sea lions. We also have quite a bit of interaction with regulatory protections. We filed a lawsuit, or we're working to prevent harassment for the Beaufort sea polar bear population. And some folks forget that polar bears are marine mammals. So I'm involved in quite a bit. We have more information if you're interested on our website or at our table. You can support us if you're interested in the work that we're doing. If you're inspired this week and just want to learn more, you can become a member for $35 a year, and it is worthwhile to make projects like this possible for communities. And you can also volunteer your time. You can monitor for belugas. You can talk to me. That is my email. And you can find out ways that you can get involved, especially this summer. We have quite a bit of opportunities coming up. And you can find us on social media, get involved, chat, comment, share. And you can also support on the ways below. That's just a few opportunities to get involved. So we love being part of the Alaskan community that's so tight-knit through ways like this. And with that, I'm going to share our tablers for the evening because we will have some breaks in between presentations. So I'm going to go around the room and have you introduce yourselves. First, we have the Alaska Wildlife Alliance, the AWA table. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Nicole Schmidt, the Executive Director, and really excited to chat with you all. Thanks for coming.
Great.
I'm Mary, the keeper as the Admin Director. We are going to table about all things facility related to advocacy, also because being the last night, I'll keep it going. All of our tables currently have something to do with poop. We're all here for that. Hi, I'm Keisha. I work for the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge over at the Visitor Center. I do education and outreach there. And here, I'm here with Anna and DeAndre. And we are talking about, I'm promoting our summer programs, and we're also talking about sea otters and boating and basically all things otters. So come back, feel our otter pelt, or look at our sea otter scan. Yeah.
Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Debbie Tobin. I'm a professor of biology here at the Kachemak Bay. And Juliet Miller and the last person here. And I'll be giving a presentation a little later. And I work with AWA and lots of organizations here in town to offer internships and different opportunities. Training network and various marine mammal research opportunities like
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. We will get underway here in just a second. And first, I want to introduce our first speaker. We have Mike with NOAA Law Enforcement, and he'll be touching on a variety of information from his perspective in law enforcement. So big round of applause.
First, I'd like to thank Alaska Wildlife Alliance for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you today. And I'd like to thank all of you for your attention, because I think when you understand and appreciate wildlife, and we have some great wildlife here in Kachemak Bay, I think that leads to protecting it. So thank you very much for your attention and your time. And I'll jump right into the first part of my presentation, which is some of the boating practices. Fortunately, it's law enforcement, so we are talking about the law and what is legal. Humpback whales. If you are boating around a humpback whale, you're required to stay 100 yards away from the whale. Anything less is harassment, and that can be a $1,000 fine. So just putting that right out there on the table. Now, if you're anchored or you're drifting and whales happen to come up around you, if it is safe to do so, in other words, safe so you do not ground your vessel or put yourself in harm, we ask that you do nothing. Allow the whales to keep up their natural behavior and do not alter it in any way. If you were to weigh your anchor or start up your engines, you could change their natural behavior. So just stay put. It's not your fault that they're within 100 yards, and that will never end up being a ticket for you. The next big part is a safe speed. We recently had a very big case where somebody thought it would be a good idea to go over 30 knots through a group that was whale watching and proceed to run over the whale. This led to a substantial fine and jail time. Safe speed is a requirement of the MMPA for humpback whales. What is safe speed? When we're talking about safe speed, it is the minimum speed necessary to safely maneuver your vessel and avoid a collision. So if you collide with the whale, you probably were not going safe speed. And if everybody else is stopped and you fly past them, it's going to be really hard to say that you were going safe speed. My recommendation is you slow your vessel down, do the bear steerage, and look for where the whales are and pass them from behind. Tomorrow, they're going to go over a lot of great safe practices, but I wanted to touch on some of the legalities. So what the law says is take is illegal. Take can be defined as harassment. Harassment is defined as any alteration of the marine mammals. Now, we're not just talking humpback whales now. The marine mammals' natural behavior. That is causing it to dive. That is causing it to alter its direction. That is causing it to leave a feeding ground. So this can be really easy to find yourself in a harassment situation. For the fines, we have two sets of rules. We have level A harassment and level B harassment. A is kind of anything. B is anything that results in harm to the animal. Now this can get tricky. Here in Kachemak Bay, it's going to depend on the behavior. It's going to depend on the exact situation. But if you're altering their, especially their feeding or breeding habits, that's going to be level B harassment. That's going to get you a $1,000 fine. So when you're viewing these animals, and we encourage people to interact with wildlife, I think understanding these animals and appreciating them and enjoying the natural beauty that the Kachemak Bay has to offer is great. And NOAA, that you may or may not be aware of, is also part of the Department of Commerce. So we encourage people to make a living where it's safe for the natural resource. It doesn't do any of us any good if the natural resource declines. You can't make money if it's not here. So please act responsible. If you have a situation where you're seeing somebody not acting responsibly, please take a picture, call me. Call NOAA, OLE, and we'll investigate it. If you've got pictures, time, the boat, position, any information you can get for me, we will pursue that. That is a serious offense in our eyes, and at the minimum, will help educate the person so they don't do it in the future. So let's talk a little bit about how you recognize harassment. We have a couple haul outs for both seals and sea lions right here in Kachemak Bay. And if you're viewing those areas, there's no determined distance and there's not a closed area around any of these haul outs. These aren't rookeries, they're just haul outs, which means there's no pups there. They're just getting out of the water. We still don't want them disturbed. If you're approaching and the seals and sea lions are not looking at you, you haven't disturbed them. If you start getting them looking at you, they know you're there, you're disturbing, but you haven't caused a problem yet. If their heads start to go straight up, they're in the alert phase. It's time to back up. You're causing them to alter their behavior. As soon as they start entering the water because you've disturbed them too much, you've crossed the line into getting yourself legally into trouble. Now you've harassed the marine mammal, and the fine is per mammal. Okay, so think about that. If you've got 75 sea lions on a rock, that can get pretty tough pretty quick. So please avoid bothering them. With whales, dolphins, and porpoises, because we have all of them. Rapid direction changes. That is the first sign that you are harassing them, is if they're moving back and forth to evade you. Stop. You've gotten too close, back up. You start having a lot of tail slapping. You start having a lot of deep diving, then you've hit the harassment stage. So please avoid doing that. Drones. Drones are kind of a tricky thing. They have not formally and legally been addressed. So there isn't a distance that a drone needs to stay away from a marine mammal. However, if your drone harasses a marine mammal, you have harassed a marine mammal. There are some NOAA studies that have been done that suggest that anything less than 21 feet starts to disturb seals and sea lions. So if you're going to fly a drone, if you're going below 21 feet, you probably are going to get yourself in trouble. So keep it a little higher and pay attention to the reaction of the seals. If they start to do that alert phase for the drone, get the drone up or out. I've seen some great videos on YouTube of people that have taken video without doing any disturbance to the animals whatsoever. You just need to pay attention to what you're doing. Now, on that note, NOAA gives permission with the proper application to film or approach marine mammals with a given permit. If you are going to do a natural film, a study for college, a study for a paper, you can legally do that with the permit. If you are going to post any pictures online, any teasers for your film, you want to put the NOAA permit number with the picture. Otherwise, you can probably expect a call from me when somebody sends me your video on my email, and I go and investigate it and I see what's going on. So keep yourself out of trouble and get that information on your picture. Please hold on one moment. Apologize about that. Okay, where were we? So, going over just a couple of the fines that we have out there, and this isn't to scare anybody, but I like to spread awareness. Unknowingly commit an ESA MMPA violation, $750. That means you could have done it and not even know you did it, and you get a ticket for $750. Knowingly, it's going to be higher. Harassment, $1,000 per mammal. Allowing your pet to harass a marine mammal. In other words, if your dog is chasing seals or sea lions off the beach, your dog can earn you the harassment fine. So how do you avoid this? You aren't letting your dog do it if you have them on a leash and you move them away from the mammal. Some of these guys are tricky and they can sneak up on you. So we're not there to get you. But if you're just letting your dog run down the beach unleashed and letting them chase all the sea lions and sea lion pups off the beach, yeah, your dog got really quick. So feeding. Let's talk a little bit about that. Feeding, just hand to mouth, feeding them like you would feed a dog table scraps from your table. Feeding can also be purposely scraping fish into the water when you know they're there, when you know they're eating the scraps. I know When you're fishing, sometimes they're going to come up and they're going to eat the scraps. That's not what we're talking about. This is you throw one carcass over and it disappears from a sea lion. So you keep throwing more and more to keep the sea lion coming back one at a time. That's feeding the sea lion. Even though you're not directly feeding it, that is feeding a sea lion. We don't want people doing that because they get used to coming up to the boats and getting fish. And what happens is they start eating hooks and lures. And eventually that's going to have a negative impact on them. Also, they can start to harass or scare people. And that is a good way for somebody to shoot one of them in self-defense. So you're not doing the sea lion any favors feeding it. Or seal. I know the harbor seal gives you that look, but don't. That is, they're very cute in the water, but they are over 300 pounds. And there have been instances of them pulling people into the water. The water is only 42 degrees. Your first instinct is to gasp, and you suck in all that salt water, and you can drown very, very quickly. So it's a real risk if one of them knocks somebody into the water or pulls somebody into the water. Don't get them used to begging for food. So that brings over some of our other legal stuff. So we covered the boating, but boating is not the only thing that happens here in Kachemak Bay. We also have some beautiful hiking trails, beautiful beaches, and sometimes things wash up on those beaches. So you find a whale bone. Can you keep it? Maybe. If you're an Alaska native, you can keep it no matter what. Congratulations, you got yourself a whale bone. If you are not a 1/4 or more Alaska native, then it cannot have any soft tissue on the bone. But if it's a dry bone, you can keep it. Maybe. What you want to do is note the position you found it. Take a picture of it. You can keep it, but we need that picture. We need the time. We need the place that you found it. I will take the picture. I will send it up to the college in Anchorage. They will determine what type of mammal it came from. You cannot keep a beluga or a bowhead whale bone. It's an endangered species. You're not allowed to have it. If you find just a hump or a fin, a couple others that come up here, gray whale, you can keep it. What's going to happen is I'm going to be given a unique number for your bone. I'm going to engrave the number into an inconspicuous spot, ask you where you want it engraved. And if I can do it, I will. I'm very accommodating. And then it will be shipped to you at our cost. But we want to know where these bones are. We want to know that they're legal. We do not want a marine mammal bone trade going on. It is not legal for you to sell that bone. It is legal to possess that bone. So, brought some commonly asked questions. We're going to cover that. So, the number that you want to call is a gentleman called Bob Marvell, and his number is 907-58. 9329. He'll let you know what kind of whale it is and whether you need to turn it in or you can keep it. And he will tell you the nearest office that you can take it to get engraved. Now, if you are an Alaskan native, you can keep it no matter what. If it is turned into a handicraft, which means it is substantially changed from its natural form, you can sell it. Once it has been sold as an Alaskan handicraft, which means you should know the name and the native village that they are from. If it doesn't have a silver head stamp, which certifies it as a native Alaskan art. Once you possess that, or you have purchased that, it is legal to sell. You want to make sure that whoever you sell it to also has the name of the Alaskan native that made it and the village it came from. That's kind of that information that needs to go with it at all times. If you are selling it to somebody who is taking it overseas, they may not be able to. So before you sell it to them, they will need to contact the country that they're bringing it into to make sure that they can legally bring it there. Not every country will allow it. Baleen. Baleen can get tricky. It's legal for an Alaskan native that is not raw. In other words, if your baleen smells, you should not buy it. It should be dry, means none of the soft tissue is on it, and polished, if not engraved and signed. I would kind of want that engraving or at least a signature so I could certify and prove that I got this from an Alaska native. It's very cool. It's very legal, but it has to be done right. You're not going to be able to buy parts in their raw form from an Alaska native. Parts in their raw form cannot be sold. Now, what are some exceptions to that rule? Pre-act. Now, pre-act is tricky. You need proof that that bone part, whatever, is prior to December 28th, 1973. Before that, there was no law prohibiting it. If you can prove, now proof can be as simple as an old picture, because when they used to print out film pictures, they would actually put the place that developed it and the date it was developed. If you have one of those pictures with that item, that would count as proof that it's pre-act. So pre-act items, perfectly legal to possess, perfectly legal to sell, perfectly legal to transport. Because they were pre-act, they were before it was happening. So they can't violate a law that didn't exist. So good to know, because sometimes you will see pre-act stuff sold in Homer. So, and that's legal. Talking about sales, there's some other things that are legal. Seldovia is a native, federally registered native village. So special rules apply. They are able to sell the marine mammal products. They are able to sell seal meat and dishes made from seal meat. That is perfectly legal and keeping with sustaining the cultural heritage of Alaskan natives. There are a few people that make sea otter products over there. They are legal. I would still want to have the artist's name and that it was made there, and I would keep my receipt with it. But if you've ever felt a sea otter blanket, it is amazing. So, and it's wonderfully handmade stuff, hand tanned stuff. When you're looking at marine mammal products, they cannot be mass produced. They cannot be harvested in a wasteful manner. They're not going to be cheap. If somebody is offering you a marine mammal part that's really cheap, you want to start asking a lot of questions. Okay, that is just my advice to you, because you can find yourself in a lot of trouble. Going back to trouble, if you are in possession of a marine mammal part that was illegally obtained, i.e. could be a whalebone you didn't report that you found, it is a $250 fine per part. If you transport that marine mammal product or part on the plane to get home, that goes up to a $2,000 per part and perhaps a felony charge of violating the Lacey Act. You can find yourself in felony trouble if that product is over a certain dollar amount, and they haven't increased the dollar amount and the prices have gone up substantially. So it is very easy to go over the threshold and find yourself facing felony Lacey charges just because you didn't get the proper certification, notify NOAA that you found something. It is much better to let us know than try to sneak one by, because if you get found at the airport, it's too late to notify us. Lacey is a import-export fish and wildlife law. What it says is that you cannot, any fish or wildlife product that is illegally harvested and then transported over state, territory, or national lines becomes a felony. So you put yourself in a lot of jeopardy, and if you've got customers and guests coming from out of state, out of country, the minute they get on the plane, you don't have to transport it over state lines. You only have to have an intention. So if you were getting on a plane and you've got the product, there's the intention. So you find yourself in trouble because you didn't report this stuff. So just so you know.
Just about a 2-minute warning.
Okay.
And then we'll get to some Q&A at the end.
Sure, absolutely. Oh, marine mammal hunting. Wonderful experience that most of us will never have, and you don't want to, because for most of us, it is illegal. If you are not a quarter Alaskan native. You can't participate in any way. You can't drive the boat. You can't butcher the catch. You can't help drag the catch. It's hands off. You can buy the handiwork product when it's finished. That's your involvement with marine mammal, Alaska native hunting. So stay out of that trouble. I think that covers that.
An unprecedented restriction. These restrictions are going to disproportionately impact already marginalized communities.
What questions can I answer? Because you don't mind if we start the Q&A a little early?
Sacrifice to get here.
Okay, great.
Having us
What can I
live in
answer
a
for you?
post-war world, even when Roe is still the law.
Go ahead, sir.
Mostly sunny, gorgeous conditions across Southeast. I'm gonna be sharing pictures. It's just been.
Yes, that can be,
sunny down
they
the
can,
past couple
they
weeks.
can
I did that
sell seal meat
After dipping into a little bit burning.
and you can either consume that seal meat in Soldovia or take it back home and consume it. It does not have to be consumed there, but it has to be bought there. So, and you cannot sell it once you've purchased it.
And then, in keeping with all other documentation, once if you were to purchase some seal meat, then same kind of scenarios like.
I would have a receipt. I'd have who sold it to you, sign it, and hopefully it has where it was bought and everything right on the receipt, and you're good to go.
Transfer of possession.
Keep the receipt on you that you legally purchased it in an Alaskan village.
So I'm a tour guide. Seal like it can move. Like it can stop. But one time, over promoting a water trip, with a bunch of campers. They came by that hall, regular enough that it should be there. And I'm sure they spook. They're actually less afraid of boats. Big boats far enough away from the slope than a kayak.
Yes, because mostly you hunt in small boats. So that would cause their disturbance level to go up. Pictures and information of that would be extremely helpful. And they could have got themselves in quite a bit of trouble because we have Coast Guard overflights over Kachemak Bay all the time. We have patrol boats. So they got lucky because that could have been, depending on how many of those seals they caused to jump, or sea lions they caused to jump into the water, that could have got substantial.
Certainly needs to be some education.
And that's what we're trying to do here. They get those heads up, back off. You're disturbing them. And you need to know that. They're going to look at you at first, straight on. Once they get that head straight up, it's time. You need to back up.
If I could ask one more question on your last comment you made about emotionalism. I know people who are married to a native man or woman, and if, let's say the native is not take you out hunting or boat.
You could go with your wife while she drives the boat to her hunting spot. She should be driving the boat. She should be the one doing the hunt. You are there in an observational capacity only.
Just curious, how many citations get issued for harassment like in Kachemak Bay? Is that,
Do we issue?
yeah,
Several, but we, with COVID, it's been more difficult to get out and people were not as frequently here. A few years ago, we had to do quite an educational blitz for feeding those harbor seals. And the harbor master had to take some serious steps to get the sea lions out of the boat basin because people had made them so aggressive that we were afraid they were going to hurt somebody. So
There definitely seems to be a culture of we can get away with it right now. You know, it's like I definitely see some behavior like boaters are just like there's 6 boats stopped watching a group of humpbacks or orcas, and people just come blazing right through there. You know, it's
that.
Yeah.
Take a picture.
Yeah.
Give me a whole number.
Yeah.
If you can tell how fast they were going on your radar,
right.
Please.
Yeah.
That's total violation of safe speed. So, and you can't, when a bunch of boats are stopped watching something, that's exactly what happened to that guy in New England.
Okay.
And he ended up on trial for it.
Yeah.
So. He didn't care. That's one of the reasons his sentence was so heavy. He didn't care at all.
Question regarding drones and humpbacks in particular. I get a lot of questions from operators about that, and because they are protected, I call protected species in this NOAA, and they told me that drones would be subject to any vehicle that's being prohibited to approach within 100 yards.
Yeah.
Is that true for humpbacks specifically?
That's a humpback specific thing.
Yeah.
We don't have that rule on the books for sea lions, seals, belugas, anything. So it's pretty much just humpback whales that have that protection.
What is it again?
Drones and how close they can approach. There is nothing on the rule books about how close a drone can approach. However, it is an extension of you. So if the drone harasses a marine mammal, you harassed a marine mammal. There was one video that we looked into where a person flew over an entire group of ring seals on the ice and had them all diving off because of the drone. So that's harassment. It doesn't matter that it was your drone that did it, unless your drone's going to pay the fine for you. So that's you. You're doing the harassment if your drone is doing the harassment.
But just to clarify, when I called them, they expressly said that 100 yards, even for a drone, was a legal limit.
That's for everybody. You can't approach a humpback whale within 100 yards. That's everything. Everybody, doesn't matter if you have a submarine, if you're swimming, if you have a drone, if you're gliding, if you're paratrooping, it does not matter. You have to stay 100 yards away from the humpback whale.
I don't have conversations with drones, but that doesn't include, that's just for humpbacks regarding other reasons.
The only one that has a set distance is the 100 yards. All marine mammals are safe from harassment. So if your drone harasses a harbor seal, you're still in violation. So it does not matter what type of marine mammal you're harassing. Harassment's still harassment.
Yeah.
Keep the drone at a safe, comfortable distance. Look for those cues. If the animal's getting agitated, you're probably too close.
I want to say thank you. I think we're going to wrap up Mike's time for now, but he's going to be around. We're going to be very popular with questions, I have a feeling. So thank you for asking so many questions. And Mike, I'm actually going to have to swing on by our table and throw your information into the chat, and people can ask how they can reach out to you.
Absolutely.
We have one last question that just came in at our cutoff that I'll have you answer as well.
Okay.
On the chat over here, but, yeah,
Thank you
great.
so much for all your attention. I hope I wasn't too long-winded for you.
Great. We're gonna take a 5-minute break, so stretch your slippers, go to the restroom, and if you were here yesterday, we do have some new tabling information over off to the side there, including from NOAA Law Enforcement, and visit our tablers, they have a lot to share. Thank you.
Hey, Emma, can you hear me? Hold on, I can't hear you. Okay, try that again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
Do you want me to just throw up my title screen? My talk?
You can share your screen, your whole presentation, and the middle screen is obviously
I think you'll have to make me a co-host.
good, good, good. I'm coming. Okay.
Okay. Up there.
Okay.
Okay.
And your slides, are they moving? Okay.
Yep.
Sweet. Okay.
I guess I should turn on my camera here.
I'm gonna have you hang tight for just a few more minutes, but you are on deck. Do you have any questions before we get started?
No. Should be just like last night.
Great.
I've got like a little timer, so I'll just start that and I'll just do my 20 minutes and then leave 10 for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. Looking forward to it. And I'm gonna put things on mute just for a second, just so folks aren't getting too much of that. And we'll start you up in a second. Wonderful.
Right, for the sake of audio, because the audio from here right now is going to be just heard on this computer, I'm going to be projecting without my mask just for a moment. But I had a request by Mike, very important, about fossils. If you're interested in learning more about keeping or not keeping fossils, there's this pamphlet over on the table, and he wanted me to give the quick message that you cannot keep fossils if you find it on public lands. If it's on private land, you can keep it. There was a mentioning because we were here now in what used to be a very glacialized area. And so if you're finding fossils, you cannot keep them if they're on public lands. So shout out to Mike for giving us that valuable information. And we have his contact information if you're interested in learning more. He's also here, but let us know if you have any questions if he's not around. Great. Our next presenter is Emma Luck. She'll be sharing more information on HappyWhale and how folks can get involved with some citizen science with IDing whales in the area. Emma, can you hear us? Are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. We will have you get started.
Great. So if you were at last night's talk, you probably remember me, but for those of you who may not have tuned in or gone into Land's End, my name is Emma Luck. I have a background in marine biology. I went to the University of Alaska Southeast down in Juneau, and my primary interests are in marine mammals, particularly cetaceans, so whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And I grew up in Homer. I'm originally from there. And for several years, I worked as a marine naturalist with the company Rainbow Tours. And while I was working there, I was really interested in documenting the humpback whales and the killer whales that we were seeing on our tours. So I took lots of photos, noted down their behavior, some other data points, and I've been sharing that with the local researchers in the area and doing some of my own personal projects in the meantime. So the focus of tonight's talk is going to be specifically about humpback whales. And there's a couple of things I want to touch on. One, the process of photo identification. Two, some of the local humpbacks that you might see around Kachemak Bay if you're out and about this summer. And I also want to talk about the community science website HappyWhale and how you can use that to help study local whales. So what is photo identification? So simply, it is the process of photographing the long-term natural markings on an individual whale in order to identify it. And this can be used with many different species of whales, from humpbacks to killer whales to fin whales. I know that even with harbor porpoises, it's starting to happen. So for humpbacks in particular, on the underside of their flukes, they have unique pigmentation patterns that are unique to each whale. It's essentially the whale version of a fingerprint. And when humpback whales go on a dive, they lift their flukes up out of the water, and for a couple of seconds, you can see that pigmentation pattern underneath. And if you get a photo of that, that can help you re-identify that whale at a later date if you see it. The markings on the flukes, the pigmentation at least, is a long-term marking. It tends to last throughout their lives. And so it's very useful for re-identifying whales, even decades later. So with all of these ID photos you can get of whales, scientists, they frequently create what are called photo ID catalogs. And these are often specific to a region. And a photo ID catalog is just a bunch of ID photos of whales that have been seen in that area. Some of them can be quite extensive with thousands of different individuals. Here in Kachemak Bay, our catalog is a little bit smaller. So a brief history on the photo ID research for humpback whales in Kachemak Bay. So back in the 90s and the early 2000s, that is when members of the community started recording and documenting the different humpback whales that are around. And specifically, this started with Rainbow Tours. They used to do whale watches from Kachemak Bay all the way out into Lower Cook Inlet, even out towards the Barren Islands. And so while they were on these tours, they were taking photos of the whales they were seeing and putting them together in a catalog. And that continues to this day. The catalog is now several hundred whales strong. I think the last time I counted it, it was close to 500. It's probably more now. But that catalog is currently maintained by Ginger Moore, and she is always looking for people to send her any fluke photos they get of humpback whales in Kachemak Bay. So I've included her contact info up in the right-hand corner. So if you have any photos that you want to send them her way, and she'll be very happy to get those. So within Kachemak Bay, or I should say with the Kachemak Bay catalog, it has been cross-matched and cross-referenced with other catalogs in neighboring regions like Kodiak, Prince William Sound, and Seward. And what has been found is that a lot of the whales that we see in Kachemak Bay are seen in other areas around South Central Alaska. So while we do get whales that come back from year to year, there are a lot of whales that also spend time in other locations. And so that can tell us a lot more about the movement patterns of these individual whales. Like I mentioned before, the photo ID effort is continuing to this day. There are lots of people around Kachemak Bay who go out and take photos of the whales, naturalists, researchers that come into the area, and even business operators. I know some of the water taxis take photos of the humpbacks they see as well, and all of that is very useful for understanding more about Kachemak Bay's humpbacks. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the individual whales that you might see if you are out in Kachemak Bay. And so we'll start with the whale that is called Pirate. And Pirate is a whale, a humpback that's seen here usually every year. I think there was 1 or 2 years that hasn't been seen here. But this particular whale was first seen in Hawaii in 2010, so it's around 12 years old. I don't know the sex of this whale, but given that it has never shown up with a calf and it tends to be on the smaller side, I am inclined to say it's probably a male. And Pirate was first seen in Kachemak Bay in 2012 and has more or less been a regular here since 2015. I think there was maybe 1 year that in the last 5 or 6 years that he wasn't here. But Pirate is often the first humpback that's seen during the summer season. I know there was a humpback whale seen a couple of days ago, and I'm very interested in knowing who that is. You know, maybe it's Pirate back for his summer trip to Kachemak Bay. And I've had the privilege of getting to know this whale pretty well. It's one that's often encountered on different whale watches and tours around the bay. And apart from the name Pirate, I like to also call it the 5-minute whale because this is one of the most punctual whales I have ever encountered in my life. When humpback whales go down on a dive, they're usually down anywhere from a couple of minutes to up to 20 minutes. And sometimes it can be hard to predict when they might come back up again. But Pirate has precise 5-minute dives. It's almost always 5 minutes. And I remember there was one time we actually took out a stopwatch and we actually timed it. And from the second Pirate dove down, from the second it resurfaced, it was 5 minutes on the dot, not 1 second over. And so that's one of my favorite little facts about this whale. Pirate is also often inquisitive. Most of the time, humpbacks just ignore boats that are in the area, but every so often they might surface next to it and, you know, give it a good look over and check it out. And Pirate's one of those whales that's known for making close passes to boats. And like we heard in the last talk, you don't want to intentionally get close to a humpback whale, but sometimes the whales want to come look at you, and when that happens, you just kind of have to sit there and wait, which I have not really heard many people complain about having that problem. So the next whale that I'll talk about that's frequently seen in Kachemak Bay is Opal. And Opal was first documented in Kachemak Bay in 2004. So this particular whale is probably around 20 years old, maybe a little bit older. And while Opal is seen a lot in Kachemak Bay, she also travels to Kodiak pretty frequently as well. And I think, in fact, she actually has a different nickname over in Kodiak. I think that nickname is Lim. Not sure why. When we nickname the humpbacks in Kachemak Bay, we tend to try to name them after, you know, some marking on their fluke that stands out to us. And speaking of flukes, she's got a very distinctive one. She's got these bright white flukes with a little bit of black and that distinct slash mark on the left side. And she tends to catch your attention if you're out and about and you see her. And she's pretty identifiable. I remember there was one time a former coworker of mine texted me and they were out watching a whale and they were trying to figure out which one it was. And so she texted me, oh, it's a whale. It's got a lot of white on it. There's like a marking on the left side. And lo and behold, it was opal. So sometimes you can figure out which one this is, even if you're not actually looking at her. So that's how distinct she is. The last whale I want to mention is one that's called Scorpio. So this particular humpback was first documented in Kachemak Bay in 2008. So this whale might be around 10, 11 years old. It could possibly be older. It can be kind of hard to tell how old a humpback whale is if you didn't see it as a calf, because once they reach adulthood, they tend to not really change in appearance. And like opal, Scorpio travels back and forth between Kachemak Bay and Kodiak. The name Scorpio actually comes from a researcher over in Kodiak who's seen this whale quite a bit and gave it that nickname. And this particular whale has become more of a regular in Kachemak Bay over the last few years. I think it's like within the last 3 or 4 years, this one has started showing up pretty regularly and is starting to spend more time hanging out here, especially like in the month of August. And this seems to be a particularly social whale. So in the many encounters I've had with Scorpio, it's almost always with another whale. Humpback whales, they're often seen alone. They don't always group up together. They might group up if there's some food around, but usually you can find them hanging out by themselves. But I can only recall seeing Scorpio by itself a couple of times. So this whale likes to hang out with others of its kind. So now I want to talk a little bit about HappyWhale. So I'm a volunteer for HappyWhale. And this particular community science group was founded back in 2015 by a biologist called Ted Cheeseman. And the goal of HappyWhale is to identify, like it says right here, identify marine mammals for fun and for science. So you can upload photos of the whales that you see and they'll get identified and matched, and you'll get to find out if anybody else has seen them. Now, it's primarily a platform that's used for humpback whale ID, but over the last couple of years, it's expanded to incorporate lots of different whale species and even some pinnipeds, like seals and sea lions as well. I'm a volunteer with HappyWhale, and I work primarily with killer whale photo ID. So if you take a picture of a killer whale anywhere in the world and you upload it to HappyWhale, it gets sent to me and I'll look it over. I'll look at some of the published photo ID guides and I'll try to figure out exactly which killer whale that you saw. So that has to be done by eye still, but for humpbacks, HappyWhale actually has an algorithm that can do it automatically, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. So how does it work? It's actually pretty simple and it's a pretty easy process. Anybody can do it. So the first step, of course, is to photograph a whale. So if you've got a photo of a humpback whale fluke, even if it's not the best quality, even if it's a little bit grainy or maybe not totally in focus, you can still upload it to the website. You'd be surprised at how good this algorithm is and what it can actually pull out of a photo that's even low quality. So once you've taken your real photo, you're going to go into HappyWhale. You can make an account. They have some instructions on how to upload the whale, some tips on how to get a good photo of one, and other things like that. And then once you upload your photo of the whale, HappyWhale does the rest of it. So it will take your photo, it will look it over, and it will look in its database of other humpback whale photos, and it will try to determine if the whale that you saw is already in its database or if it's new to science. So once it's figured it out, you'll either get a notification that says, hey, the whale that you saw has been identified, here's its name, and then it'll give you a link to that whale's profile so you can go and check it out and see where it's been and some more information about it. Now, if it's a whale that has not yet been entered into the system, it'll create a new record. It'll tell you that this whale is new to science, and then it'll get its own brand new profile. And if anybody else sees that whale, you'll get an update about it. So whether it's a whale that's already been seen by other people that you uploaded, or it's a brand new whale that you found, if somebody else sees that whale and uploads its photo to HappyWhale, you'll get a notification about it. So for example, let's say you go out in Kachemak Bay and you take a photo of Pirate the humpback whale. You get on HappyWhale, you upload that photo, and usually within a day or two, you'll get a notification that says, hey, your whale's been identified. This whale is Y165 Pirate. And then you can click on the link and you get to see all the places that Pirate's been recorded and some information about that particular whale. So it's really cool. You get to see where your whales go and what they're doing. So here is an example of what a profile on HappyWhale looks like. So this is mine, and I have HappyWhale sightings logged into a couple of different places, lots of them in Alaska, a few in Washington, and then a couple over in Norway from when I was doing some work out there. But this particular map just shows my sightings around the Kenai Peninsula. So if you look at the map, you can see those round circles that have numbers in them. Each number represents a unique encounter with a whale. And on this map, it's a mix of humpback whales and killer whales. And then using this map, you can zoom in even further. You can see more information about those sightings. You can see more precise locations about where you saw those whales. And on the left side, you can see it's got some information about your own personal profile. So here I've got a bio. I've got down here at the bottom under map info, it shows the number of encounters I've had, number of individual whales identified, and the species that I've recorded here on HappyWhale. So your own personal profile can tell you a lot about the different whales that you've seen. So the really cool thing about HappyWhale, like I mentioned before, it uses an algorithm for matching, and it's a really, really good algorithm. It has a 99% success rate in identifying and matching whales. So that's actually better than a person can do, much lower margin of error. And it's a lot faster than a person as well. So HappyWhale can match whales in 1/40th of the amount of time that it takes a person to manually match those same whales. So it's a lot faster and it's a lot better at it. And one great perk of HappyWhale is that the data is shared with researchers all around the world. So it's not just a great tool for whale watchers to record their whales, it's also a great tool for researchers who are looking to answer questions. And because HappyWhale's database is so extensive and it covers all areas of the globe, there's a lot of information in there that can be really useful to researchers. And this stuff can get used in studies. I remember recently, I think one of the more recent publications that used some HappyWhale data is they were looking at resighting rates of whales that had been entangled in fishing gear and lines and ropes. So using sightings logged into HappyWhale, they could actually track these entangled whales and see how long they survived over time. So it's a really, really great tool for researchers as well. And this one always blows me away. HappyWhale currently has 60,000 individual humpback whales recorded in its database. And when you think about the global population of humpbacks, that's a pretty significant chunk. And it's growing every day. People are uploading new whales that haven't been seen, new calves get uploaded once they've been identified. So it's constantly growing, and it is just a treasure trove of data that can be looked through. So this particular slide, it looks a little busy and it can be a little bit confusing, so bear with me and I'll break it down a little bit. But this is a map that shows all of the humpback whale sightings in this defined area, so between Kodiak and Prince William Sound. Now the number circled in red, that is every single humpback whale encounter that has been uploaded to HappyWhale in Kachemak Bay. So that includes encounters that were recorded last year, all the way back to encounters that happened more than 20 years ago. So that's a lot of different whale encounters that have been recorded just in Kachemak Bay. Now that's not necessarily 539 unique whales. A lot of those are going to be encounters with individuals that come back to Kachemak Bay every year. But that's a lot. And if you look, there are lines and arrows radiating out from that particular circle. And those lines and arrows, they show movement of individual whales from one region to another. So all of those lines that are pointing towards Kodiak, that indicates movement of humpback whales between Homer and between Kodiak. So these are the same whales going back and forth between these locations, and over to Seward and Prince William Sound as well. And which I think that's just the coolest thing, the fact that you can see the movement patterns of these whales. Now, of course, these aren't direct movement patterns. It's hard to know that unless you tag it. And obviously whales are not crawling over the Kenai Peninsula to get to Seward and Prince William Sound. But it gives you a general sense of the direction that they're going and the places that they're spending time in. And what I really love about this is that this particular map, it shows how interconnected all of these regions are. We see our whales here in Kachemak Bay, but they're not just our whales. These are the same whales that people in Kodiak are seeing, and they're the same whales that people in Seward and Prince William Sound are getting to view as well. And so I think it's pretty neat that all of our communities are connected by whales. So that's something to leave you to think about for a little bit. And with that, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Emma. I just wanted to point out to everyone that's here in person that the logo we have for the forum, that is pirate. So that was a thoughtful detail from Emma that we included. So it is a local whale that is very, very well loved in the community. So thank you, Emma. And we do have we have a question, at least in the chat. I think I'm going to address that first, and then we'll come to in-person questions.
Sure. Yeah, I can't see the chat right now, so you'll have to read it out to me.
Yeah, perfect.
She asked, can you remind us if we can or should submit whale photos from previous years?
Are previous year submissions helpful of photos?
Oh, yeah, historical stuff, absolutely. That can be really useful because a lot of these whales, they haven't been seen since like the 60s or 70s, some of them. So historical photos are fantastic. And so, yeah, that's great to upload to HappyWhale and even to send to Ginger if you have them from this area.
Okay, then.
What's the status of population of humpbacks in Alaska?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact number. I can maybe look that one up real quick. I do know, fortunately, that I think it was a couple of years ago, the humpback whale population in Alaska, so that's the one that travels between Alaska and Hawaii, and some of them go to Mexico as well. They were taken off of the endangered species list because they've made such a good comeback from the days of whaling. So if you give me 1 second, I can look this up really quick and see if I can find something to answer that question for you. So let me see here. Okay, so to give you an idea of the global population, right now it's about 80,000 different humpback whales. And in the Central Pacific, so around Alaska, I believe that number is somewhere around 20 to 21,000. There might be a more recent number that I'm not seeing, but just off the top of my head, that's what I can give you.
And then.
Why do people think that a small population of humpbacks spend the winter in Kachemak Bay?
So a few years back, a small population of humpbacks stayed in Kachemak Bay over the winter. Do you know why that is?
So the question of, are there some humpback whales that stay here in the winter? That's a really interesting one. And I think it's kind of a hard one to answer because some whales migrate late. So they might stay into October or November, and then they might leave, and then they might come back early. So unless you're getting consistent photo IDs and confirming it's the same whales here throughout a period of time, it can actually be really hard to confirm if it's the same whales actually overwintering. But why, if there are some here, why might that be? Well, humpback whales, the reason they go down to the tropical breeding areas of Hawaii and Mexico is to breed and give birth to their calves. And not every whale is reproductively mature. So, like yearlings or whales that are 1 or 2 years old. So those are going to be whales that aren't going to be breeding immediately. So if there's a good food source around, that might keep them here. But yeah, the question of are there whales that stay here all winter long is it's a good one. It's kind of hard one. It's a hard one to answer at times.
Yeah, go for it.
What about vocalizations? Like, I know in Hawaii they're singing a lot more, and it's not like they do it in Kachemak Bay. But have they been recorded to call in Kachemak Bay?
I don't know about Kachemak Bay specifically. They will make noises, but when it comes to those like elaborate haunting songs that you hear in the breeding grounds, you usually don't hear that here. And I say usually because I know in Southeast Alaska and British Columbia, they have been heard singing really late in the year, like right before they go down to migrate. So feasibly, there could be some whales that are singing here if they're really late in the year. When there are some sounds they make when they're cooperatively feeding. So bubble net feeding is a really elaborate cooperative feeding method, and it doesn't happen really in Kachemak Bay. It tends to happen more like in Seward or Southeast Alaska. But when that happens, there are whales that are letting out calls as part of that foraging behavior and that cooperative feeding technique. So it is conceivable you could hear the humpback whales in Homer making noises. I mean, if you got a hydrophone on your boat, you could drop it in and see what they're up to.
Great. I think we're wrapped up on questions, Emma. Yeah. If you can throw your information into the chat, if people would like to reach out to you, that would be great. And then we'll have that here and folks online will have it. Your photographs were stunning and I just want to say you did a great job and to thank you again. And if anyone has questions further on this, you can chat with Emma. And she also does a lot of this work with orcas as well. So we just focused on humpbacks tonight, but you can also work with HappyWhale with Orca Whale ID and chat with her more on that. So thank you, Emma. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Just see what.
So you should be good.
So you do want me to mute or not?
So now everyone online is hearing us from this.
Okay.
So this is because that way it's closer to the speaker. And so then when Marc comes on, go ahead and mute this because he's projecting online. So we
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you. Do you need me? That's why I was. Yep. What's that? I don't know. Yeah. Right.
Ready. All right, we're going to take our seats for our final presentation. And we are going to be extending past 6:30 this evening, just as a heads up. If you cannot attend past that, we will have the recording online and on our YouTube. So there will be that option to watch the remainder later on if you have to join. But otherwise, we'll be here and enjoying the final series of chats. And we will be having 3 presenters today. We'll have 2 in person and 1 virtually. And so I'm just going to be jumping up and helping with a computer transition for when we get to that virtual presenter in the back. So bear with me. I know I'm a tall person and I will try not to get in your way as I shuffle through. But yeah, no echo, so we're good. Great. I'll hand it off to Deb.
Okay, is everybody okay if I take my mask off up here? So, all right, good deal. If you feel like moving back a little ways, you can. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Deb Tobin. I am a professor at the local campus of UAA KPC, so University of Alaska Anchorage Kachemak Bay campus. And we have the Kachemak Bay campus here in town, which some people don't even realize is here. But for the last 16 years almost, I've been fortunate enough to be the biology professor here. And about 12 years ago, we started the Semester by the Bay program. And I have a lot of my students here in the classroom from that. And they've luckily been able to participate in a lot of what I'll be showing you here today on harbor porpoises. So first of all, I have to thank Martha Briscoe, who I think is online, and Marc Weber, the co-presenter of this talk. So he'll be speaking next after me and giving you a whole bunch more information on all sorts of other marine species, but I'll mostly be talking about a little bit about Dall's porpoise and harbor porpoises today. But Martha Briscoe was a student in our class, and I hear she's going to be again this fall at 91 years of age. Go Martha. And she has taken our class 4 or 5 times, I think, and she also has donated funds to our research through the Kachemak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, or KBNER. All right, so really quickly, I know a lot of the water taxis in the past asked for just 5 to 10 tidbits of information that they could share with their clients on board. So I did want to start a little bit from the very beginning in terms of what's the difference between a porpoise versus a dolphin, and then give some other information too. That's sort of one snapshot slide that's easy to maybe memorize or work off of and convey to your clients on board. So a porpoise versus a dolphin. Most of the information on the left is for porpoises, on the right is for dolphins. And so first of all, you can see that porpoises have these triangular shaped dorsal fins, whereas dolphins have a curved or a falcate dorsal fin. The teeth is also different, but before we go inside the mouth, look at the beak here, or the rostrum. Porpoises have these really blunt and no discernible beaks for their rostrum, whereas a dolphin typically has what we think of bottlenose dolphins, and many dolphinid species, not all, but most have this very characteristic beak or pointed rostrum, excuse me. And here at the bottom, you see the comparison between the 2 skulls. Again, a porpoise on the left, a harbor porpoise, which is mostly what we're going to talk about today, and a Pacific white-sided dolphin, which occasionally people here in the bay, at least in the past, I've heard anecdotal sightings of Pacific white-sideds here in Kachemak Bay. So when Marc starts to talk about, sorry, Marc is saying there's something wrong with the slides.
Trouble being able to see the slides at the Zoom. So.
Oh, can we fix that? Working on it? Okay. All right. Thank you, Marc. And then if you look inside the mouth and in these skull images here, you can see that porpoises have a really obvious spade-shaped tooth, whereas you can see the bottlenose have these very pointed teeth, like you see down here in this wonderful illustration from Uko. Okay, here's another really great synopsis of all of that, and what I thought was this great drawing that Mike Rock did from his work at OSU, and just some really nice information that, again, you could have on your boats to share with your clients if you'd like, with essentially all of that same information and a little bit more with regard to, say, the family name, the family Delphinidae, as well as the Phocinidae for the phocids or the porpoises. And then the overall size, as well as some of their group behaviors and sizes, which we'll talk about here in a second. So harbor porpoises are often referred to as common porpoises as well in some places in the world. And you can see here that their overall length and weight and lifespan is relatively small compared to most other species that we're familiar with, whether they're dolphins. And in the family Delphinidae, the largest one, like we heard about from Dan yesterday, was the killer whale or Orca. So they live in, these guys, we say harbor porpoises live like life in the fast lane. They start breeding at a young age. They don't live terribly long. When they come to the surface, it's for like a split second, then they're gone. And so, and the males tend to be smaller than females. So we have quite a big difference between these guys and most of the delphinids, especially here in our waters. The main contrast that's related to these guys is the killer whale, the Orca. So kind of the extremes here. And if you compare the harbor porpoise to Dall's porpoise, how many people here have seen a Dall's porpoise? How many people have seen one in Kachemak Bay or Lower Cook Inlet? So not many. There's very few, but there have been a few. And a few years ago, there were some sightings that were right outside the bay. And then a couple people didn't believe us. And then the next day or two, there were some dead ones that showed up actually, and we did necropsies, Marc and I, on those Dall's porpoise. So they do inhabit our waters or nearby here, right outside Kachemak Bay, and maybe even come into the bay once in a while. They tend to be much more offshore versus coastal habitat, primarily for the harbor porpoises. And as you can see here, they look very different, but if they come to the surface in just a split second, it's really hard sometimes to tell the difference. And Dall's porpoise, to me, you know, when you see them in a really quick instant, they look like miniature versions of orcas. They're tiny little killer whales, sort of. And and Marc is saying, yes, they are in Res Bay. They are. We just saw them, my students and I, when we were in Res Bay last week or the week before. And so we do see them in Resurrection Bay, although not as regularly and as large groups as we used to. Dan can also probably tell you a whole lot more about that over his many years of working there and still working there. But in general, you see the range is different: Pacific, Atlantic, Baltic. I'll show you a range map in a minute for the harbor porpoise, and you'll get a better idea of where we find them compared to the Dall's porpoise, which is really just in the North Pacific. 3 versus 2 subspecies, like I said, coastal versus offshores. And then we also have the group size, which usually harbor porpoises are in small groups, maybe 1 to 4 we typically see when we go to Halibut Cove Lagoon, sometimes just 1 or 2. But there have been instances a few years ago when I was out with Gareth, who I know is online, or should be, he's one of my students, as well as Carl, who run Bay Excursions. They will sometimes aggregate around Gull Island and in other places here. And at the surface, at any one point in time, we counted about 50 or 60. So if you imagine how many are under the water, we're talking probably closer to 80 to 100 at a time. Why they're there, we're not exactly sure. We assume it's either food or sex. So we're not exactly sure again, and we're hoping to look into that. And that's one of the areas of study that we're hoping to address here soon. Dall's porpoise, same thing. You tend to see them in slightly larger groups, more commonly in groups of around 8 to 12, but they can also be seen in hundreds or even thousands sometimes. So very fast, love to bow ride most of the time. If you see them in the distance, sometimes it seems like they're stampeding towards the bow of the boat to bow ride, which we saw again when we were in Res Bay last weekend. Whereas harbor porpoises tend to be a little bit more shy of boats. Unfortunately, this is a PDF, so I won't be able to show you this great video that Gart sent me the other day of some harbor porpoises surfacing very close to his boat and right there near sort of feeding frenzy with eagles and herring in the water and so forth. So I just tried to see if it'll play, and I do have it on a thumb drive if anybody wants to see it afterward. But in general, these guys, big, stout, largest of all the porpoise species, and the Dall's porpoise, though, and the harbor porpoise will hybridize, and Marc's going to tell you more about that here in a minute. All right, Dall's porpoise do sort of form these rooster tails. So at the surface, as opposed to harbor porpoises, which one thing we really would love to get information from all of you on is if you see them and you can get information on where they're found and how many there were and any photos or videos. We would love to see if you notice any sort of aerial behavior, not even so much aerial, but more than just breaking the surface of the water. Or if you hear them, they sound like puffing pigs because it's that really quick inhalation, exhalation. And other than that, when they're at the surface, usually it's for mating purposes, which we'll show you and describe in a minute here as well. Dolphins, of course, very characteristic for their leaping high out of the air. Dall's porpoise rarely do that, but you do see these big rooster tails, these fan-shaped splashes behind them. This is that video that I was really hoping would play, but it doesn't want to play. So this was a great video just from a couple days ago off Grass Island, and then a couple days later, or maybe it was the next day, Curtis saw this again. So here's those range maps. Again, I'm not going to dwell too much on this or the next few slides that have a lot more information, but you're welcome to come back and revisit these anytime you'd like. So the upper left map that you're seeing there is showing you the various numbers for the Bering Sea stock. This is Cook Inlet, so 450 or so you'll see in a minute that we hope are about 450 in Cook Inlet, Gulf of Alaska stock and the Southeast Alaska stock. And then everything in blue that you see down here is the range of harbor porpoises around the world. These next few images and details are from Kim Sheldon et al.'s paper, which is a really great paper if you have a chance to read it. It goes back and discusses a lot of the anecdotal sightings, some of the research surveys that were done mostly on seabirds and other platforms of opportunity. One dedicated harbor porpoise survey, but other marine mammal surveys as well, but lots of archaeological data and the whole past of harbor porpoises in this region. So it's a really great article that I highly recommend. Some information that you'll see here, again, these are sightings specifically around Alaska and in Cook Inlet for anecdotal sightings. And then you will notice here, these are stranding reports that Kim summarizes as well in that paper. And this, except for one entanglement back in 1956 in Upper Cook Inlet, there weren't any reported harbor porpoise sightings until the mid-1970s or so. And then a few more since then. But here you can even see in terms of the stranding data, these are all ones, and here's a two, and all these letters pertain to different areas within Cook Inlet, as you can see noted there on the map. But so not many strandings even of harbor porpoises in this area. This image, again, these maps and this histogram show you nicely how many overall harbor porpoise sightings were collected during various types of aerial surveys. And this spans from 1993 to 2012. And again, it should be noticed that, you know, these numbers are pretty low, and 66 is the highest accounting here. But many of these images that you see over here too show you the different locations where some of those aerial surveys were conducted and where sightings occurred across different years. One thing up above that I wanted to point out was that the numbers seem to be increasing since the 1970s, but I would also say that a lot of our research effort and just time on the water and so forth, attention maybe to the species and other species has increased since then. Back in 1991, that one dedicated harbor porpoise aerial survey estimated about 136 individuals, and that was it in all of Cook Inlet, but they didn't include the shoreline or most of the bays in Cook Inlet. And as we just discussed, they're coastal species, and it's really hard to see like from your boat, let alone from an aerial survey. So who knows exactly what the number might have been back then. In 93, 428 were obtained during a seabird survey. And then back later in 1998, during a beluga survey, that number again was lower, about 249. So that's somewhere around, you know, that where we get that 400, 450 estimate that we think exists. All right, I better wrap. Yeah, moving here. Other harbor porpoise sightings, just in general, notice that all these factors on the left affect when we're going to see porpoises and why, or we may or may not see them at times. And then since 2000, there's been all these reasons for harbor porpoises to potentially be avoiding certain parts of Cook Inlet. And poop is one of them. So got to come back to poop again. And we need to understand that, you know, to determine what's going on with harbor porpoises in Cook Inlet, Kachemak Bay specifically in the lower inlet, we really have to understand some of these other effects. And then we have to recognize that they're mobile and cryptic species. And so if we want to try and get at their habitat, their community structure, or anything else regarding harbor porpoises, we're going to need to really think about how we would conduct these studies, right? So again, these are just from 1993 to 1999, the places where in Lower Cook Inlet sightings occurred. So not a whole lot. And here's Kachemak Bay, right? There's a few there for sure. All right, so this brings me to what we're doing, what we've been doing and what we're currently doing, and then where we're moving forward into. So where's Mike? Is he in the room? Underneath this toolbar right here are all of my NOAA permit numbers. I swear they are all there. They're just hidden right now from that. So they're all there, and they're appearing on other slides as well, but they are there. So our harbor porpoise is up in the left, but basically we've been primarily studying these guys in Halibut Cove Lagoon with our students through the Semester by the Bay program. And again, with that funding from Martha Briscoe, we always see seals and sea otters when we're out there as well. And so we do line transects, and we also do just opportunistic sightings, and we try to identify the different individuals, and we've created a little bit of a catalog and have had some matches in that catalog. I didn't even introduce myself really, but my background is actually on dolphins. I've studied common or bottlenose dolphins and spotted dolphins and humpback whales all as part of my master's work, and then switched to river dolphins and otters, giant otters and North American river otters for my PhD, and mostly worked on North American river otters. And then when I came up here, it was like sea otters. So, and lots of river otters, which is really fun. And so it's nice to actually be able to document those species as well. So there's my permit number, you can see my, but here's a harbor porpoise just swimming right through, you know, some sea otters and close to shore. So it's a pretty nice area to study these guys. We've seen mothers and calves, as you see here. Well, oh, I can go back. Nope, maybe it's the next slide. I'm gonna maybe show you something cuter than Dan's vocalizations yesterday. So this is a little bit more about mothers and calves, just in terms of their overall gestation, like I was talking about, their life in the fast lane, more or less. We don't know. Look at that neonate. Come on. That's the cutest thing ever.
How big is that?
This little guy is probably no more. I mean, they get on average about 5 to 6.5 feet when they are adults. So estimating there maybe 1.5 feet. Yeah. Thank you. So anyway, some of these images, by the way, this one in particular was actually taken in San Francisco Bay, where Marc and his colleagues do a lot of research as well on harbor porpoises and other species. So, but we've been working under the same permit for a while because we had an Alaskan study site and a San Francisco Bay study site. They do take pictures right off the Golden Gate Bridge. It's pretty awesome. Here's an infant in that calf, or a calf in the infant position where they sort of draft behind there and sometimes feed. Now, I mentioned a little while ago the aerial mating. And so It's been studied in many places on that map that I showed you now. And every instance we've seen males approach females only on the left side. And there have been graduate students who have also now studied the internal anatomy of females. And we will just cut to the point and basically say that they always approach on the left-hand side. It's very quick. Like you see here, this is a good image, believe it or not, our first image that was taken by a student, no less, on our boat. And so here is the male right here. There's a dorsal fin. There's the tail fluke of the female. She sometimes performs these evasive maneuvers or maybe even tail slaps him as he's going by. Here you can see another that Marc took later that same year. And so we can tell you lots more about porpoise sex later if you want. This unfortunately is another fantastic video that shows a mating attempt, and you see how fast it takes place. And then there's a slower video after that that shows it really slowly, which is you can completely see exactly what's happening there. And this is pretty obvious. That's the penis of the male right here. And the female is right there. And so this was after the fact. So this is one of the only times that these guys are making a huge splash and or are out of the water. So if you guys see anything like this, and I hear every once in a while from water taxi operators and folks on the water way more often than I am, that they have seen something like this. Even if you didn't get a picture, let us know, please. We'd love to know. Because those two photos that we have, those were the first and second and only pictures in all of Alaska for harbor porpoises. Yeah. Okay. All right, so photo IDs, that's the other thing. If you're close to them and, you know, either not under power at all or they approach you, there's lots of beautiful natural marks on them, like you see here, as well as scars that persist. And so you can see here some of our photo ID matches from 2018 to 2019, where these images or these scars here and that little pock mark there and that straight scar are still visible a year or so later. And here they are again from a different view. So that's the same individual. And if you can get any pictures like that, we would love to see those. Other types of marks that you see there. And lastly, our future plans. So we are currently applying for a new harbor porpoise research separate from the California group that has moved in a slightly different direction with the Marine Mammal Center. And we're doing this, Marc and I, in conjunction with Bruce Schulte, another behavioral ecologist out of Western Kentucky University. And he and some of his graduate students and KB Nur, who will be our responsible party for our new permit. Beginning this summer, we'll be expanding our research to be not just in Halibut Cove Lagoon, but also in Eldridge Passage, where that image like Curtis sent, or that video from Grass Island, as well as around Gull Island, where some of those really large aggregations. We were out, my students and I, doing a beach intertidal zone survey and saw one right off the beach in Peterson too. So we know they're around. So if you guys see them, please let us know. We're trying to do photo ID, including drones, which again, if Mike was here, I'd tell you that we have spoken to our permit authorization agent, and we already know all about that. And then potentially eDNA, and we have hydrophones from the National Marine Mammal Lab right now sitting on my desk, sadly not in the water, that have been on loan to us to do this work if we want to, but that means a lot of time in front of the computer, and I'm not really a fan of that. Environmental DNA, sorry, so you collect water samples, yeah, and if you're lucky, poop, but, no, but water samples, and you have to have a permit for that because even the DNA is part of the animal. So much like Mike was saying earlier, you have to have a permit to collect that.
So Deb, it'd be like slop loss.
Exactly. Yep. And then for their prey and for the other species in that whole community structure as well. So sea otters and harbor seals and such. So we'd work with the Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies to make that, get permitted for that. Yep. But I've been doing eDNA work now on belugas for the last couple of years in the Kenai River. And it's just a whole load of fun, and I do it with my students, and we filter back at the campus here in town, and we send up our samples to the folks in Seattle that do the same poop analysis for Dan and other types of fish scale analyses, Kim Parsons and their group, which are great, and they send us back all this wonderful information. That's the kind of science I like more so because I get to be out here and not sitting in a lab or in front of a computer way more often than I already am. But this is kind of what we're looking for. And so we would love to, so here's just a couple of cute more pictures and then I am over time already. So here's some foraging behavior. You can see a fish right there in the mouth and in front of this guy. There's another really cool video I could have showed you, but here's my email. I'll have that at the end as well. Just please notify us on the Whale Friends group text, or just email me this information if possible, your lat long, the date, the time, how many individuals you saw, if you got any pictures or behaviors were documented, awesome. They do this thing called bubble blowing. A lot of species, do that before they get to this. Sorry, oh my gosh, I went way fast. They blow bubbles near the surface, sometimes not just because they're exhaling before they surface. Other species do this too, and we document that. This is a really cool foraging video, which again is not going to show, but an image of a group size there. This was in San Francisco Bay. And last one, any questions, and mine and Mark's emails there. If you can't read those, it's DD Tobin and MA Weber with 2 B's at alaska.edu. So thanks to so many people, especially Martha Briscoe and all of our students, and thank you for listening. So I am going to hold off on questions until after Olga and Marc are done talking, and I'm just going to stand up here now and let Marc take over and tell you a whole lot more. So thanks for your attention. All right, you're welcome.
Thanks, Debbie. Am I live now? Okay, I can't hear anybody in the background, but I'll ask Debbie to advance the slide if she's ready to go.
Hi, Marc, can you hear us?
Now I can. You cut out for a little bit after the applause, or
Nope.
during the applause.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Perfect.
We can hear you.
Then feel free to get started, and Deb will move those slides for you.
Great. And you've got my image up, right? I'm showing it live versus a fixed image, but you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Great, thank you. Okay. You can move us along, Debbie, whenever.
Hold on, Marc. This isn't letting me advance now.
While they're working, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I am retired from a pretty long career of Fish and Wildlife Service. My last station for 10 years was at Islands and Oceans, where I met Debbie, and I have been working with her for most of that time since I met her at the college as an adjunct instructor. And I've been kind of a lifetime marine mammal researcher and enthusiast, and enjoy studying them and seeing them wherever I can in the world. I did have the opportunity to publish a book, a field guide to these animals with some co-authors. So some of what I'm trying to talk to you about today comes from that. And some of it comes from Kate Wynn's lovely little field guide to the marine mammals of Alaska. And I'd really recommend the latter, Kate Wynn's book on all boats heading out into Alaskan waters. And if you want to go a little deeper into marine mammals in other places, or even in Alaska to a certain extent, then our guide, Marine Mammals of the World, a guide to their identification, is out there too on Amazon. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about tonight, and I want to make this as a presentation like an annotated field guide, really. I want to talk to you about everything else you haven't heard much about, although Debbie grazed into some of it, like the dolphins. And it's because there are other things out there than humpback whales, killer whales, and harbor porpoises, and a few harbor seals. And I wanted to put them in a perspective. You can turn to the next slide, Debbie, if you would. Now, I tried to think about them in a couple of different sort of capacities, and I expect some of you will look at these and kind of squint your eyes and go, what are you talking about? And I'd love to have that conversation. I'll be back up in Homer to teach again this fall, starting in mid-August. So you can email me, we can get together, we can discuss it. I know a lot of you have a lot more time, almost all of you practically have more time on Kachemak Bay than I do. So I took my best shot, but I wanted to try and get a sense of how to organize these species that could show up in the bay, certainly also in the inlet, of course, or in the Gulf of Alaska, where many of them have been sighted. Even in recent years, some of the things you haven't thought are out there are being seen at times. So this is how I did it. I listed some as uncommon, some as rare, and some as historic, as you can see on the left, offshore, extralimital, and all of those possible on the right. And those letters and color kind of coded letters will follow the talk through. That's a fin whale down at the bottom from out by Kodiak Island in the Shelikof Strait. Go ahead, next slide. So, and also, I'm going to try and talk to you a little bit about pinnipeds because the world is full of a whole bunch of highbrow cetacean people, and not enough people talk about pinnipeds as far as I'm concerned. So you'll see pinnipeds throughout this talk because they're marine mammals too, and they need some attention, need some airtime. So on your left is a California sea lion from California. I haven't actually seen one in Alaska, but they do show up and are seen around various parts of the state out to the middle of the Aleutian chain about. And then stellar sea lions. I didn't quite know what to do with stellars. People probably will disagree with me calling them uncommon, but to me, I use that in the sense that they're just not seen. I don't see them on every trip I make in the bay. So that kind of dropped them a little bit down the notch to uncommon. Although, like the officer said, they can be persistent in the harbor. I just mean about ones where you're kind of cruising the open bay. They just don't sort of pop up on every trip, in my experience. Go ahead. So Debbie talked to you a little bit about Dall's porpoise. Here's a little bit more. Dall's porpoise are gorgeous animals. They're really sturdy, stocky porpoises, about a foot longer than harbor porpoises, built for speed. They're powerfully built. You can see just by looking at the bodies, they're pretty robust for their size and strikingly colored. A white patch on their flanks, a white patch on their fins, and even on the trim of their tail flukes is an area of white. So they're pretty hard to confuse with harbor porpoises. And also, as Debbie told you, they're highly energetic and swim in groups and will come and ride bow waves and swim by boats. Not always, but often. And you can see they throw up a distinctive splash that's gotten the nickname of rooster tail when they break the surface. Harbor porpoises only do this when they're running for their lives in an emergency, and nothing quite as exaggerated or dramatic as this. And this will matter in a second when we talk about some hybrid porpoises. Okay, next slide. You've seen this slide, but I'll only point out one detail you might not have noticed. On the right with the Dall porpoise illustration, notice how the female dorsal fin white is different than the males, the female being in the middle. And so they don't quite have as heavily and deeply or lower down marked dorsal fin with white when they're fully grown and mature, as do the males. So that's just a small difference. The bottom animal is something that occurs out in Western Alaska. I've never seen one in Alaska, but I have picked up a stranded one in California. So they're not entirely confined. They're a subspecies of the Dall porpoise that lives in the far Western Pacific over by Asia. Okay, next slide. So some recent discoveries, relatively recent discoveries, include finding hybrid porpoises. These would be biologically intergeneric hybrids. That's even more because they're not that closely related, harbor porpoises and Dall's porpoise. They're in different biological or scientific or taxonomic genera, yet they can interbreed. And so you see some examples of those crosses here with Dall's and harbor porpoise. And it turns out they've looked at these animals, the genetics of these animals, and in all cases so far, it's been a male harbor porpoise and a female Dall porpoise. And also in all cases, notice so far, the offspring hang around with the Dall's porpoise. They like to run hard, like you can see in the bottom there. That's kind of a tanner version of the hybrid color. And they throw those rooster tail splashes. So they tend to travel with mom's side of the family, and so far. And now, we have not seen these in Alaska, and we're eager to see and keep looking for them. So your mission, should you decide to accept it, is to keep your eye out for porpoises wherever you go in Alaska and see if you see a real odd one, a tan one or a black and white one in a different manner than the Dall's porpoise. You can see all known occurrences are down in the Salish Sea in British Columbia. But we have areas in Alaska, like Resurrection Bay, which when I jumped in and answered that one chat, harbor porpoise and Dall porpoise can live very close to each other in Resurrection Bay. So it's very possible that this could happen in the future in Alaska, just no record yet. Next slide, please. Oh, and by the way, so far, at least the hybrids have made it back to Dall's porpoise. So I think, as I believe I've read, so there's some evidence of that too. So that's kind of fun. So Cook Inlet belugas, a highly endangered population of beluga whale. The beluga whale, of course, being a whale found throughout the Arctic. The Cook Inlet population is isolated, has become genetically distinct, and is being managed as a separate entity. Is quite endangered, highly endangered. They occur throughout much of the upper Cook Inlet, and used to, historically, there's the H there, occur all throughout the inlet system and even out into the Shelikof and down along the coast towards Yakutat, where there are even a few belugas to this day. However, they've not returned for some reason to anyone's verified information or knowledge to Kachemak Bay since at least sometime in the late 80s. Now, if you've got photos and you're holding back, get them to Debbie, get them to the Beluga researchers in Anchorage. Let's talk about it. If you think you see one, report it. Try and get any picture you can without causing harassment, of course. Let's get some records of these guys. Debbie and her students recently have seen them down as far as Ninilchik. So they seem to be drifting a little farther south on our side of the inlet than over the last decade or so. So keep your eyes open, but notice that the animal on the right, that's a harbor porpoise. It's just an odd color variant from California that can happen anywhere in the world where these guys live. It's called leucistic. That means all the dark pigmentation, or much of it, is replaced with white pigmentation. It's not truly an albino animal, but rather a leucistic animal, a mostly white individual. Go ahead, Debbie. Okay, so blue whales and fin whales. Well, blue whales I just had to throw in because, you know, what's a talk without something about blue whales? They're so magnificent. But blue whales historically were all throughout the Gulf of Alaska and down the Aleutian chain. They were hunted extensively in our waters. In California, where they've made a pretty good comeback, they come in fairly close onto continental shelf waters. So keep your eyes open. There are recordings of them, not a lot in Alaskan waters. There are a series of sonobuoys on big anchors out in the Gulf of Alaska and out in the Aleutian areas. And I think the Tekla had a sighting of one in the Gulf of Alaska. So, you know, not now, and maybe in the past, but maybe in the future. Fin whales, however, a little different story. They're out in the Cook Inlet, they're out in the Shelikof. It's a pretty high concentration area for them at the mouth of the inlet and down the Shelikof Strait. The picture in the upper right is a group of them spouting next to Kodiak Island out in the Shelikof. And then you can see they're kind of brownish, depends on the light, from grayish to brownish. Not a lot of distinctive colors, and the less the light is good, but they have a really interesting fin that you can see in the lower right that comes off the back kind of on a slope. It's not like a steeply angled fin like a dolphin's fin, rather it kind of gradually rises up off the back, but much higher than that of a humpback whale, and there's no intermediate hump. All those little speckles you see on the back of that lower right picture, and if you look closely on the center lower picture, those are indications of fin whale wanderings outside of Alaskan waters, which they do, they're migratory, down into areas where cookie cutter sharks live, below 38 degrees north, and they will attack anything, really, and take a chunk of flesh out on a little ambush attack and leave a kind of a little divot scar, that a bite wound that forms into kind of a oval scar. So fin whales and blue whales are heavily plankton eaters. Fin whales will mix it up. They'll eat plankton and fish. And they're out there, and there are sightings in Kachemak Bay. They're just pretty uncommon in the bay. Some of our students got some a couple years ago. So other large whales that are uncommon or rare, California gray whale here seen in the top row of pictures, and you can see the characteristic shape of their flukes, their colors. They're quite mottled in color. The yellow on the head of the top of the head of the one on the left and the right side of that whale is the top of its head. Are barnacle incrustations or colonies on the whale. Gray whales migrate by us in great numbers, but they don't detour into Cook Inlet or Kachemak Bay very often. So listed them as uncommon, although you can go look for them, and Debbie and our students just did in Resurrection Bay at this time of year when they're migrating back north to their Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea feeding areas. They can wander in, and in fact, any of these things can drift in or wander in sick or dead. So that's always possible. But gray whales have been seen in the lower Cook Inlet. They just don't come in that much. Right whales, the two pictures on the bottom, are probably our rarest whale in the entire North Pacific. Their eastern population, which are shown here, number less than 50, probably less than 30. There are more in the Western Pacific, but not much. They're one of the rarest whales in the whole world. And they're seen in the North Pacific like every few years, let's say away from their gathering area in the outer Bristol Bay and lower Bering Sea, where they are known to concentrate. And there's one other little spot off Kodiak that they have been found in a few more than one time. But elsewhere, you're lucky to have one show up every few years to even as long as 10 years, whereas they used to be abundant from Mexico all the way up to Alaska. They're just few and far between and hanging on by the very edge of their flukes. They have a very distinctive blow. Notice the gray whale's blow, kind of bushy. You saw the pictures of the fin and the blue blows. Look at this one carefully. It's kind of very distinctly V-shaped, pretty remarkable, pretty distinctive. So if you see anything like that at all, get on your radio, get on your phone. There's something possibly very interesting going on. And they have a very, if you go back to the right, they have a very steeply arched jaw, very black, no fin on their backs. They didn't show a picture of that, but a totally smooth back with no dorsal fin. And their flukes are quite broad. Okay, next slide, please. Well, everybody asks about minke whales. I put them here. They're not rare. They're not uncommon. They just go unnoticed a lot, or maybe misidentified. They're a small baleen whale. That means they're a filter feeder, and they will eat krill and they will eat fish. They scoot around a lot in very irregular movement patterns, searching for swarms of fish and other prey. And they often travel alone. They have a pretty dolphin-like dorsal fin. Sometimes people even think these are somehow big dolphins, or dolphins as they see them, only a little bit of them in the distance. They occasionally get airborne. It's not a common thing that I've experienced, but they will do it. They've got a beautiful little white band on their band on their pectoral flipper, which is what you see on the upper right. You can see in the upper left a lot of birds hanging around that whale from British Columbia. And down below, I just threw in a picture of a swarm of glaucous wing gulls and black-legged kittiwakes in our bay, just to show I've seen more minke whales associated with bird flocks than anywhere else. I used to see them from my deck. I lived up on off of West Hill, and we'd sit on our deck and look for swarms of birds and just put the binoculars on them and be patient. And oftentimes a minke whale would find that activity and surface right alongside it in the middle of it. So you have to be patient with these guys. But Debbie and I have seen them from the spit, from sitting having lunch on the spit. They'll pop up. And so they're just not an easy whale to know and not an easy whale to see it more than 1 or 2 times. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about some of those pinnipeds I'm so proud of. These guys are all some of my favorites, as well as all the marine mammals are, but I have to play for the underdog, so bear with me, or underlion in this case. We've got 2 kinds of sea lions in Alaska, one that's pretty common, a little bit uncommon in our bay, as I said, but we could debate that, and I'm happy to hear those arguments. And one that's kind of rare in our waters, John Maniscalco from the Sea Life Center published a paper on their occurrence, the California sea lions in Alaska. He came up with 50 sightings over about a 20 or 30 year period. There might be more now, and things that are happening in Alaska that might drive that are warming of waters. This is more of a southern sea lion to us, occurs from British Columbia down to Mexico all the time, and maybe extending north as waters warm up. And we're most likely to see males, as is the picture of the pair together. That's a full-grown California sea lion next to a pretty much grown stellar sea lion. You can see they're pretty different, not only color, but just everything. Head, massive head on the stellar, huge shoulders and neck and body. They get up to 2,500 pounds. California sea lions living real good if it gets to about 800 pounds. So there's a big disparity in size. On the left, you see even smaller are the females and juveniles of that species, very slender of neck, very small and slight of head compared to anything stellarish. And then down on the bottom, you get a better look at a distinctive feature of what a lot of what might be up here would be male California sea lions. And they get a big bump on their head, a big crest called a sagittal crest on the crown above the eyes in that lower left picture. That's a typical feature of adult male California sea lions. Females don't have that. On the right are a pair that were on Gull Island, a couple of juvenile stellars. Then you have a male stellar who stranded on the spit a few years ago. He was quite badly injured. You might not be able to see it, but there's a bone actually from one of his digits of his hind flipper sticking out. He might have been grabbed by a killer whale. Medium-sized bull. He's not fully grown, not breeding size yet, but big boy. And he was not doing all that well. He has lost some weight too. And in the bottom, you see kind of a more typical view when you're anywhere near a colony. You can get to see a colony of these animals in Resurrection Bay at the Chiswell Islands, which are on the regular tour route for the whale watching and such, and glacier tours in Resurrection Bay. So you see a couple of males there squaring off face to face, and females around them. There would normally be probably pups too during the breeding season. They would be dark brown, but big, massive animals defending trying to establish themselves on land territories to be around the females. Okay, next slide. So let's change gears. I didn't put a break slide in here, but we're moving to the offshore type animals and extralimital. If you're a birder, you kind of know what that means. It's those things that are wandering far out of their normal range, just as a one-off kind of thing. A lot of birders really live for rarities and extralimitals and vagrants, however you want to describe them. to add to their birding list. Well, for us, those would be things that live out in the Gulf of Alaska quite normally, but rarely come into the shallower waters of Cook Inlet and even more shallow waters of Kachemak Bay. One of those is the Baird's beaked whale. You can see here, it looks like a giant dolphin, but those things get up to 40 feet long, and they certainly aren't dolphins. They're in a whole different family of whale. And then one that's stranded on the Alaska Peninsula on the Bristol Bay side that one of Debbie's students sent in. So to give you an idea of what a small one looks like. Go ahead, next slide. And just for fun, I wanted to tell you that in whale science, this is a really big deal. The Baird's beaked whale is the bottom picture of the illustration, and the top one is a whole new species that was really only sorted out in 2019, believe it or not, through some work of scientists in Japan and the United States. And it's been described as an entirely new species called Sato's beaked whale. It's just a diminutive form of Baird's beaked whale, but genetically and physically entirely distinct, other than sort of superficially looking like a smaller version of the bigger one. So the bigger one is the Baird's. That would be what we'd more likely expect, but the Sato's, or Satos, I think is the proper way to say it, has been found stranded in the into the Alaska Peninsula, and there are acoustic recordings out there and in the Gulf of Alaska and in the Bering Sea, so they're around. Next slide. And here's a picture of a skeleton one. It's the one that happens to be on the right. And just want to point out that our own Reed Brewer from the college was instrumental in the discovery of the first of these animals in California, and helped salvage it and get it into museums. So go Reed, way to go. And if you ever happen to be out at Unalaska Island, go to the high school, and they've got a beautiful skeleton on display of this individual in their common area. Next slide. And then our only other common beaked whale, there are also something called a goosebeat whale. I don't get into it, I don't have time, but is this mesoplodon called Steiniger's beaked whale. It's a genus of beaked whale. Debbie and I processed a stranding of it in Kachemak Bay. They show up from time to time. They show up in the Aleutians in groups on the beach called mass strandings, or kind of a rare event, but they're more frequent out in the Aleutians for this species than anywhere else in the world. You see the lower picture, left and right, are of a male. The one on the left has its tusks out. The one on the right, its tusks are obscured by barnacles growing right there. Kind of awkward feeling, I'm sure. And in the middle is a picture of a small mass stranding that shows you those guys, a male in the foreground and a group of females behind. I was able and fortunate to process two mass strandings on Adak Island with the help of Kathy Burick's team in 2017 and 2018. We had the largest stranding ever, a mass stranding for the species, of 8 individuals ashore at one time in 2018. So the reason for these mass strandings is not well understood, and kind of don't have time to get into it right now. We can talk later, but a lot of theories about this. But the Aleutians are a big mass stranding location for this species, and they don't know why. Okay, go ahead, next slide. Sperm whales, the largest kind of toothed whale, is pretty common in Alaskan waters, just only again offshore because they're deep divers and squid specialists. They will take large fish, and to the chagrin of fishermen in Southeast, where they can pull sablefish off hooks and, as I'm told, straighten hooks with the strength of their jaws. So pretty amazing capabilities to grab a fish off a hook when you're 50 to 60 feet long, as an adult male sperm whale will grow to. They can be very social. They can live in big groups, particularly moms and their calves, can be in generationally long-lived groups, that is many generations aggregating of mothers and their calves. Deep divers, and they usually precede their dives with a raise of their flukes. And notice they have a weird hump on their back, not particularly a fin, and not like the kind of the lump on the back of a gray whale, rather an elevated hump that characterizes sperm whales. Also, their blows are unique. It projects to the left and forward from the end of the head, not back from the end of the head as it does on baleen whales. And finally, I'll just say, if they'll let you, the high school has an amazingly articulated full-length sperm whale in its foyer if you want to see what a skeleton of one of these incredibly crazy beasts looks like. And they do have some pretty strange anatomy. Next slide. Some of the dolphins that Debbie mentioned that can be in the waters and have been in the waters of Alaska. Risso's dolphins, the Tekla, saw some out in the Gulf of Alaska a few years ago. That's bottom left and right. Upper left, the long-beaked common dolphin is been seen as far as Prince William Sound. So maybe it's only a matter of time. And Pacific white-sided dolphins. Why they're not in the inlet more, or even in our bay, I kind of don't know, and it's just darn too bad, because they're a lot of fun, as you can gather from the picture from BC. They are common throughout the waters of Alaska tend to be more outer continental shelf or so, but they've been in harbors and bays in the Aleutians and in Southeast. So go figure, we're just not quite lucky to have these guys handy underfoot, which would be a ton of fun if they were. They can form very large schools of hundreds of animals and be very active, gregarious jumpers, leapers, twisters, and spinners. So all these animals are kind of fun to see. The striped dolphin in the middle would be an offshore rarity, but all of them and more, next slide, have been recorded in Alaska's waters. So they all make up our fauna, and that includes false killer whales, believe it or not, which that picture's from Hawaii to show you that they're more of a warm water species, but they have gotten here. The middle, top left and middle left are false killers. On the bottom is one of Debbie's pictures of a short-finned pilot whale that has been recorded in Alaska. That one's from Mexico. And then offshore bottlenose dolphins can come here as well. That's on the far right. Next slide. Now, again, not into Cook Inlet that I know of any records, not into even Prince William Sound for that group, but offshore waters. In fact, there was a recent paper published on a very interesting group of common offshore bottlenose dolphins and false killer whales off of British Columbia. So they're coming, and I guess I would throw a pitch in to say, one of the good reasons to keep your eyes open is the world is changing. As you well know, things are getting warmer. Climate and oceans are changing and warming, and species that tend to prefer warmer waters may be finding a window of opportunity to move into Alaskan waters, at least on occasion. So, and that may change to be more so in the future, it's my guess. Not that I have a complete crystal ball, but that's really why I want all of you guys to stay on your toes and keep your binoculars working and cameras at your sides, or on your bridge of your boat or something, so you can get at them. Next slide. Almost done here, folks. So I just want to tell you a fun story that seems to have a climate connection as well. I study bottlenose dolphins in California, coastal ones this time, a little different than the far offshores. And these animals were never north of Southern California. I say never, but basically until about the early 1980s, and they moved up into Central California, then they moved up into San Francisco, and now we've had a couple of our study animals, the San Francisco area, move all the way up into the Puget Sound area, a 1,000-mile journey out of nowhere when they hadn't done it in all basically modern history. They've shown up in shell midden sites of 1,000-year-old shell midden sites, or 2,000 or 3,000-year-old of native peoples of Washington State, but they've been gone for a long time. And now they're kind of back. And where will they go? How far will they extend their world? That's to be seen. And all we can do is keep our eyes open and look for stuff like this. Next slide. Okay, just the last few species to talk about are fur seals. There's one. We've got northern fur seals on the left and the lower two in the center, and Guadalupe fur seals on the right. And now you probably know about northern fur seals. They breed in great numbers on the Pribilof Islands and migrate right by us, occasionally stranding on our shores in the Cook Inlet system. I think the Sea Life Center has a few records, primarily pelagic, oceanic kind of guys, and females moving along the shore, heading out into the North Pacific to forage for the winter. However, they do hang around the edge of the continental shelf. They will, as you can see in the middle center one there, sleep at the surface a lot in what's a classic picture called a jug handle. That's a northern in the middle and a Guadalupe doing the same behavior, kind of draping a front flipper over the two back flippers to stay warm. And the early sealers used to call this a jug handle, like you could grab them out of the water and pick them up with your hands. I wouldn't advise it for not only for legal reasons, but you get the heck bitten out of you. But if you could even get that close. They'd seem asleep, but they startle easily when they feel the presence of a boat. On the far right, I wanted to point out a very interesting thing. Debbie and a few other partners and I are publishing a paper on a finding. Debbie has the first record of Guadalupe fur seal in Alaska that I know of ever, including archaeological records. She picked up this pup that was acting sick in 2007. He went to the Sea Life Center, got a little better, went to the Marine Mammal Center in California, got really good, and was released and survived for quite a while with a satellite tag on its back. So it made its way all the way to Alaskan waters, into Kachemak Bay. So not every small brown furry looking creature is a sea otter. Well, most of them are, almost all of them are, but keep your eyes open because a keen observer that she is, she and her husband Josh found this animal and even had to talk officials into believing her that this wasn't a sea otter. And pictures, of course, seal the deal. But there are, again, reasons to keep, obviously keep tuned in about what's going on. And you can see the two fur seals are similar. There are differences in their noses, the Guadalupes being more sharply pointed, and in their flippers. The lower center picture, you can see the northerns have really long hind flippers, much longer than the Guadalupes, and other subtle differences we can talk about or send me an email and I'll tell you more about it. There are some fun differences to look for. But that's what keeping your eyes open does. Go Debbie and Josh. That was an awesome find. Next slide. And a few more seals. There has actually been a walrus briefly in Cook Inlet. I'd love to know more. If anybody remembers the records, I did some research for this talk and I could not find any like newspaper or other, maybe the Inlet Keeper in its Twitter feed mentions it, but I couldn't get the record out. But it was a walrus I recall hearing about that was on the west side of the inlet for a period of time. That would be an extraliminal or a vagrant wandering out of the Bering and Sea in Bristol Bay and making its way up along the coast. Probably a good enough amount of things here to eat in the way of invertebrates for these guys. They just are not here now, and I don't know about them here historically. But if you've not very far away over in Bristol Bay, the upper picture is out at Round Island. There's other haul outs along the shoreline of Bristol Bay here and there as Cape Seniavin. So they're not that far away. And I think people are even offering fly to sea tours now of walruses in Bristol Bay. And then ribbon seals. These are a really wandering polar seal. They live particularly in the Bering and Chukchi Seas, but particularly the Bering. And once the ice is gone in the lower Bering, they take off and live an oceanic life. And they've been seen down in California. There's a couple of pictures here from Washington State. You can see they're pretty hard to miss. They don't look like our harbor seals in any way, shape, or form for color, unless you look at the little ones on the bottom, the smaller ones. The female banding, lower right, isn't as extreme as the male banding, but it's there. And you can see on the lower left, the little weaned pup doesn't have the spotted coat of our harbor seals. It might be about the same size, but it has more of a kind of a counter shading look with a dark above, light below, with a little light ear patch, light patch of color over its ear. So we should be able to figure those guys out. Now, there haven't been any here that I'm aware of, but they've gone by us and gone and showed up in California and Washington. So probably, again, a matter of time. And next slide. Elephant seals. You wouldn't be putting those on your list, I'm sure. Okay, I see the message. Thank you. And I'm almost done. Just to point out that they're here. They're here all the time. And we had like the seal down the lower right. We had one crawling ashore over by Anchor Point a few years ago, sick in that particular case, but that's what they look like. No spots. The smallest elephant seal will be quite a bit bigger than the largest harbor seal. So that's a thing to look for. And if you're at sea out in the Gulf, you can see them at the surface occasionally, rafting. But these guys spend most of their life underwater, diving really for long periods of time and deeply to catch squid and very deep water fishes. Next slide. And finally, just to mention, keep your eyes open for other things. Leatherback sea turtles have been sighted in the Gulf of Alaska. They do occasionally get entangled in gear and might come in. So they're gigantic animals and kind of unmistakable the way they pop their heads up at the surface, as you can see in the upper right. Big broad heads and ridges on their backs distinguish the leatherback sea turtle. By the way, the nearest these guys breed, the ones that come up anywhere into this part of the Pacific, is the Southwest Pacific in Indonesia. So they travel, they get around, and they follow where the productivity of jellyfish is high. That's one of their favorite foods. Go ahead, and I think we are done. Thank you. Sorry for however much I ran over. Thanks very much.
All right, Olga, I will give this back to you. Do you want me to run you? We'll actually try the audio from here. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna make this brief. I studied humpbacks in printing sound for 4 years, actually. Let's see, do I just push this guy here?
On the arrow.
And this is the whale that was seen off the bay here. But what I found in the sound was that, and here's Deb, and this was that year where there were so many in the bay, and they were feeding and lunge feeding, and it was pretty amazing, but not very common. We've seen here, but it really, humpbacks are just following the food. So when they are a few in here, or lots, as there were that year, it's because there was something they were feeding on. My study was, I was first in photo ID, as you heard Emma talk about HappyWhale, but what I ended up finding was that there were, so here's platoon sound. Oh, Dad, can I have your pointer? Oh, this is- Oh, yeah. So here's Prince William Sound. No, it's not. Now it's not advancing.
Let me see it. The arrow. We just had this earlier, so I'm just gonna start it again. And then just go. All right. There we go. Stupid count. Yeah. Sure. There we go. Is that the next one?
Yeah. So actually, Emma's picture from HappyWhale was pretty amazing, showing the movements to Kodiak. These are the movements I found just between Kachemak Bay and I don't know how this works. There. Kachemak Bay, around the outer coast and into Prince William Sound. So there is a lot of movement, and you saw that with the HappyWhale picture, but they are feeding on herring. This I just took right off of Yukon Island, and I really, there's a lot that goes on right off of Yukon Island. I recorded some really amazing transient killer whale calls a couple of years ago right there too. But here's where I started. I was just a graduate student, I mean, not even a graduate, undergrad out of UC Santa Cruz when I started my study in Prince William Sound with this little boat and a couple of animals, including a cat. And I have a camp on a beach in the Sound. But what's been remarkable is that I saw whales over and over again, and a kind of a, not a family of whales, but definitely long-term associations. And it was always thought that humpbacks didn't have that. And I think that if you took all the Kachemak Bay data, you would find that it exists here too. The double blowhole, the humpback. And this is one we call Thumbelina. And you can get a sense of how long the humpback is. This is a 17-foot long kayak.
Hey, Olga,
Yeah.
can you say something more about the association?
Yeah, I'm going to. Yeah. So anyway, I'm just kind of cruising through these pretty quick because a lot of this has been covered. But this is one whale. A lot of the things the humpbacks run into is either killer whales that will scar them, or vessel strikes. And this whale, Gandhi, was in our catalog, and it's been seen here in the bay, it's been seen in the Sound, it's been seen in the outer coast, but it definitely came in contact with probably killer whales. Then I have one, so what I found were these regular whales I'd seen a lot. This is one we called Magellan, and it has migrated and been seen in Mexico in the winter, which is pretty cool. Let's see. And then a lot of the Prince William Sound whales have been seen in Hawaii. And that's a pretty typical migration. So these are all ones that have been attacked by killer whales. But here's a vessel strike, and that's a pretty big prop, probably like a bigger boat. But here's one that I knew actually quite well. I've known it for 40 years. It's a male, and it showed up with these scars fairly recently in the last few years. So it's, it was that, I think, was probably a speedboat that just grazed it. And then another thing that's really threatened the humpbacks was the oil spill. And that was tragic, and it came right through by my camp. This is the path of the oil here. Okay, so here's a couple of females that I saw. This is them side by side in 1989, but I actually first saw them in 1980. And then here's a picture of them together in 2013. So that is 24 years later. They're still swimming side by side. So in all the literature, it said that humpbacks didn't have social groups, and they were promiscuous, and they just were kind of loners. But I found that to not be true at all. So I did study. I took a program that was designed by Hal Whitehead, who's a Canadian, and it's called SOCPROG, which stood for Social Program. And you take every sighting of two whales together. So if there's 4, then you take all pairs out of those 4, or if there's 3, it would be like these 2 and these 2 and these 2, you know. Anyway, you take every sighting of whales seen together, and then you get like a percentage of association. And what I found was, sure enough, and it was really kind of what I felt like I'd been seeing, was 2 groups in the sound. And I ended up naming the Magellan's group and the Old Ladies Clan. And this is what that social analysis showed me. And this is the Old Ladies. And so what I found was that so I've got the females are in pink, and what I found is that the females had pretty strong bonds, but each female seemed to have one male that they were seen with frequently, which was interesting because they were, like I said, they've been thought to be promiscuous. And then I'll show you what the analysis of Magellan's group is. So this is Magellan, and he's the one that's been seen in Mexico. So it seemed that there were also females he had a lot of females that had long associations with him. That's him. But there also were a few other males that had long associations with a female too. So it's interesting, and we don't really know that they are not still promiscuous, but which means they mate with other males. And but you know you see a lot of competing in Hawaii of males to mate with females. So it was just curious that they had these long-term associations with males. And these 2 groups that I found seem to actually have sort of different areas of the sound. And this is the Old Ladies, and this is Magellan's clan. However, there was a little bit of overlap, and they do overlap a little bit. It's not like, well, some killer whales will avoid each other, as Dan was talking about. It wasn't like they avoid each other, but they definitely had their areas. So that was interesting. But in 2004, one of those females was seen in the Old Ladies group, was seen in Hawaii together. So that was pretty amazing, which means maybe they migrate together, maybe they are together in Hawaiian waters. So that was a pretty cool sighting. And that's it. I'm just grateful the whales come back, and One thing I was going to say, but in the sound, if we looked at the data in Kachemak Bay, as you saw, the whales that come in, the humpbacks that come into Kachemak Bay are part of a bigger group that are going to Kodiak and along the outer coast. But if you did an association analysis, I bet you would find these small social groups exist even here in the inlet. So that's all I have to say. But I did, if anyone wants to hear these two things, humpback sounds and killer whale sounds, and also I have a place that you can get a hydrophone. I mean, a hydrophone is a really cool thing to have. And so I'm gonna, if you want to hear these crazy, this is the North Gulf transient killer whales, and I recorded these just right off of, also off of Yukon Island. And you're going to hear some echolocating, and then you're going to hear these calls. So that clicking is the echolocating. Pretty cool.
One thing that's highly interesting about that slide call, we were hearing that call on a remote hydrophones in Inchbrook Entrance, Montague Strait, Resurrection Bay, and suspected that they came from transient killer whales because unlike residents who share calls in a family, transients have calls shared to the whole population. And so that was helpful to have a confirmation that those calls were indeed coming from transients from a visual perspective.
Yeah, and I was able to ID all of them, so it was pretty cool. And I'm just going to play you some humpback calls. These are from Hawaii though, so there are calls in Alaska, but it's more kind of glorps, and it's when they're feeding. But they do hear the mating songs in the fall, which is pretty cool because they're getting ready to head to the south. Anyway, you can hear some others in the background there. But I have so it was recommended to me a hydrophone that you can get pretty easily. You get the whole kit, you get a speaker, get a hydrophone, and like a Pelican case. If anyone's interested, this group is in Washington, and you can send away for them. And I love having a hydrophone because you never know what you can hear. And this literally, these killer whales were just, they were kind of messing with the boats, that not messing, but diving under them and being pretty friendly with the boats that are out there just halibut fishing, the little boats. And I just dropped my hydrophone because I was curious to see that, because I knew they were transients, see them being so friendly. And Craig told me, and you might agree, that sometimes after they've made a kill, they'll be pretty friendly. But anyway, that's when I got those crazy calls. So pretty cool.
Wow, thank you. We're gonna,
We're done.
Deb, do you want to come up for Q&A if people have questions, or would you rather folks?
You want to let people leave, and if they have questions, they can come find us, because everybody's been sitting for so long. And I know I'm well happy to answer questions, but I know everyone's probably like me, you know, somewhere sitting for so long, but I'm happy to. Can you show your video? What's that? Can you show your video? Oh, I can show
If anyone has questions, if anyone has questions for Marc, feel free to throw them into the chat and he can get to those, anyone who's virtual. And same with online. We'll be back here chatting with Marc
at the table. So we'll answer any questions. And
you could put this on the chat, I guess. These are the people you can get the hydrophone from.
yeah, yes, we'll throw that in, and Nikki will be able to type that in. That'd be perfect.
Yes. Oh,
Olga's whale ladies.
yay. Sorry, she didn't put up the last slide. The whale ladies.
I recognize a few of these characters.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and ask Olga questions if you want, or Mark over there. I'll get this loaded.
Yeah, I'm here.
Questions for Mark, let us know, and then we'll I'll turn that audio on. But otherwise, we can also throw them into the chat and
Feel free to take off. My students